Hello, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, or evening to all of you.
Let's begin with the introduction to GitHub Pilot session. GitHub Copilot is an AI-powered code completion tool that was developed by OpenAI in collaboration with Microsoft, and it uses machine learning model to provide suggestions for code while you are typing. It's been the subject of much excitement and speculation in the developer community, with some people calling it a game changer for programming. So let's understand how it is a game changer in the programming. So uh, it is like a autocomplete feature wherein it provides you the code snippets. So we already know that there were so many auto completions extension we already had. Like for Python, Microsoft was providing Python extension that was helping us to autocomplete our code, basically syntax. But this goes more beyond that, wherein it is able to understand the context of the problem which we are solving, and it is able to provide you the code. For example, if you see here, we are looking at the uh, Golang programming language code. When if we write a function header, basically to get average runtime of successful runs in seconds, it will just put down the code, and if we hit tab key, it will just provide you the code. So this is like autocomplete with context. Now let's look at how we can write better code basically. So in this example, if you see here, we are looking at the TypeScript programming language code, wherein we have a JSON schema. Okay, JSON schema is basically a data format. So we have commented that out, and we are just writing a function header called collaborators map. Okay, so if you write this function header and hit Control Enter, GitHub Copilot will provide you the code automatically. So in this example, if you see, it is creating a map of all those keys and values from the JSON schema and providing the map as a return value. Okay. So you don't need to write a boilerplate code. You just have to provide what you need to do, and it will do it for you. Let's look at another example. Here is a TypeScript example again. Here, if you see, there are cases wherein we have to write repetitive code. So in this case, we are just writing the language and whatever comment character which we are using in the programming language. For example, in JavaScript, if you want to comment a code, we are using forward slashes, two forward slashes. Same way in Python, we are using hash symbol. So if we just provide the two programming languages, it will provide you the remaining ones automatically. So you can select which one you want. So if you, in this case, you can see that CSS, HTML, Bash, and other languages are automatically displayed. And we can hit the tab key in the keyboard, and it will select all those things, and it will display to you. Now let's look at another example. In this case, we are looking at Python. So GitHub Copilot can be also be used to write test cases for your code. Okay. So here in our case, we are using a unit test basically for a function. So their function is strip suffix. So what we are doing in that function, we are just removing the suffix from the file name and returning the file name without the suffix. So if you want to test this function, we can just write a function header called test underscore the function name basically, which function you want to write unit test cases for. So if you see, it is automatically providing you all the statements which will help you to test out this function basically. So assert is a statement which is used in Python to check the validity of any of the function or variables. So you can write test cases also with GitHub Copilot. Let's look at how we can use how we can see the alternatives or alternative solution basically. So when you are writing a function header, basically, for example, if you write in Python def max some slices, okay, this is a function. So if you want to see another alternative, basically, whatever is shown here, so you can use key combination like alt and the square brackets to cycle through the combination or approaches basically. So it shows a header bar kind of. You can just select next or previous, and it will show you the alternatives. And if you want to accept it, you can click on that button, or you can hit the tab key on the keyboard. So this is how you can see the alternatives basically when you're working with the GitHub Copilot. So main feature of the GitHub Copilot is basically you can confidently code in any language. It can be a PHP, it can be a Python, it can be TypeScript or Ruby. It supports everything. Okay. And there are many things like if you want to create let's say scraping bot basically. If you want to fetch the tweets from the Twitter, or else if you want to create a scatter plot, basically data visualization, you can do that also. Let's look at the testimonials of the um, GitHub Copilot, which is used by the engineers. So there is one engineer from OpenAI, Harry Edwards. He's saying that trying to code in unfamiliar language by googling everything is like navigating a foreign country with just a phrase book. Okay, so using GitHub Copilot is like hiring an interpreter. So you don't need to do any googling anything or going through the Stack Overflow answers, etc. You can directly go ahead and just write a comment, and GitHub Copilot will provide you the code. So this much better it is in terms of the productivity of developers. Now let's look at how it works basically behind the scenes. So what Microsoft did basically is they bought the GitHub. Okay, so GitHub has a variety of code modules in that. So what they have done, they partnered with the OpenAI company. So they built a codex model basically. So codex model is a machine learning model which runs on the code which is coming from the GitHub or any other website basically on the internet. Now what they have done, they integrated it with the GitHub and created a service called GitHub Copilot. So, and GitHub Copilot can be installed on any of the integrated development environment of developers, what we call as IDE. Like it supports Visual Studio Code, then Sublime and IntelliJ IDEA also. So all those IDE supports the GitHub Copilot extension. You just have to install it, and whenever you're writing a code, you just have to provide the context basically what you want to do. Let's say a function header. If you want to fetch some pictures, basically you can write a function header and it will provide you the code. So it fetches the suggestions from the OpenAI codex model. It transmits it to the code editor, and code editor displays it basically. And if you want to get some more suggestions, basically you can remove that code and you can write another comment basically if you want to improve something. So it will provide you the improved suggestions. So this is how it works behind the scenes. So in the beginning, when the GitHub Copilot was launched, it was launched as a technical preview, and it was having a wait list. It was around like 1 to 2 years back, and it was a free preview. You just have to join the wait list, and once your turn had come, they will send you a mail, and you can download the extension and you can work with it basically. But afterwards, what they have done recently, like around 1 year back, they introduced a what do you call that, a subscription based model. So wherein you are having this individual and the business model. So you have to pay $10 per month for the individual, and if you are a business, you have to pay $19 per month to use this, and $19 per month is per user basically. So these are the feature it provides basically. uh, for enterprise users, it's better because it provides you the corporate proxy support, etc., all those things. And $10 if you're an individual, you can spend basically. So now let's look at the extensions. So there is an extension called GitHub Copilot. So if you're on VS Code or any other IDE, you just have to search for this extension. You'll get a link. You just have to install it. After that, you have to go in the GitHub and you have to sign in basically. So that GitHub Copilot matches with your GitHub account. And there in the GitHub account, you have to pay the price basically $10 per month. And let's look at the practical example basically. So here we are just creating a new JavaScript file. It can be empty file. We don't know anything about JavaScript now. Okay. So what we have done, we just write a function header basically. Let's say we want to get the days which are appearing between some particular date. Let's say 1st of January to 31st of Jan. So you want to get all the days basically. So if you write that function header, and it will provide you the code basically, so, to get the dates or get the days between these dates. So if we hit the tab key, it will accept the suggestion, and you can go ahead and test the code basically with that. So this is with regards to JavaScript or a programming language. Now let's look at how you can get the alternate suggestion. As I already mentioned, there are key combinations which you can use, or you can just hover around the code and you will get buttons to cycle through the suggestions. In our case, whenever you're writing a function header, right, it will provide you the function header kind of like a small header wherein you can see the next, previous, accept, and open Copilot. So four things you will see. So you can click on those buttons and it will provide you next suggestion or previous suggestion, and you can accept the solution also. So if you're on Mac OS, you have to use option key along with the square brackets. So open square brackets will go through the previous, and close square brackets will cycle through the next suggestion basically. And if you are on Windows or Linux, you can use Alt key along with the open and square brackets, same combo. Only thing is the option and Alt are different for different operating system. Um, and the if you want to accept it, you have to hit the tab key. And if you don't want to accept it, if you don't like the suggestion, you can hit the escape key. It will negate that suggestion basically. So this is how you use the GitHub Copilot with alternative suggestions. Now let's look at another example basically. Here we are having some function basically. Like there are some mathematical functions like we are calculating the models like sigmoid and 10H. So if we want to see different approaches which we can take to solve these problems, what we can do, we can hit Control Enter key combo. What it will do, it will open a separate tab basically, and the tab name will be Copilot. In that you will see around 10 solution. So you can select any of them. There will be buttons on top of each solution. If you see, if you click on accept solution, that solution will be transferred to the left side of the editor, and you will be able to use that solution. So this is with regards to the seeing all the different solutions in the tab. Now let's look at how you can generate a comment, generate a code from the comment. So let's create a new separate JavaScript file basically, and we provide the um, comment basically wherein which what this function should do. For example, if you want to get all the images without alternate text and give them a red border. Okay, so we are on a website basically, and we want to change some CSS basically. We are adding some border. So if you provide the function header like function process, it will provide you the code automatically. So in here, if you see, it is going through the DOM element of the browser. It is getting all the image elements, and then it is checking if it contains alt. If it is not containing the alt, it will just add the red border basically. So this is very useful if you are debugging your code on the browser. Now let's look at some other things. So let's look at some SQL programming languages. SQL languages basically. So here if you see, we are writing some SQL queries. So if you write a comment basically, let's see, we want to create an employee table with name, age, department ID, and as foreign key. So if you hit Control Enter, it will provide you all the solutions which you can take. Sometimes it will be like duplicate entries basically. Okay, and sometimes it will be like separate solutions which are new and kind of intuitive. So let's, if you see here, first and second, there are differences in them. Like the second uses some other syntax, like we are using integer references. So this is kind of more advanced approach, which second solution is providing. So accordingly, you can select whichever you like or whichever you understand better. So this is with regards to the SQL. Now let's look at some other things, like if you want to use it with a web framework. So you already might be knowing that there are different programming languages, and each programming language will provide you a framework to use with the web. In, for example, in Python we have Django, we have Flask. Okay, same way with JavaScript we have Express. So let's look at how to create a server using Express. So you can write a command called express server on port 3000. Okay, so GitHub Copilot will provide you all the code which is needed for you to create a server, express server basically on port 3000. Okay, and if you want to do something with that server basically, you can add one more comment like return the current time. Okay, so it will provide you code to return the current time on the browser. Okay, so this will be very handy if you are working on big projects, and if you just want to do something quickly. Okay, you don't need to write boilerplate code. It will provide you automatically. So this is very helpful if you are working with frameworks also. So let's look at now the configuration that we can make with the GitHub Copilot. So there are very some nice features with GitHub Copilot provides behind the scenes. So if you're writing code, if you want some inline suggestions, let's say you want to autocomplete the variable names basically or function names, GitHub Copilot can provide you better names than you can imagine basically. For that, you just have to go in the settings of Studio Code or any other IDE. There you have to search for these things like inline suggestions. Okay, you can click on enable or off, and it will do that work. And there are other things like advanced things like how many inline suggestions you want, basically the count. So you can provide that also. And there is autocomplete, so that also you can turn or on and off. And there is also the count which you can use with the autocomplete suggestions also. And the last thing, the languages. So here is, it is very important. So whichever languages you work mostly with, for example, I work with Python, you just have to provide a kind of dictionary. In this case, I'm using key value pairs. So Python true, same way a markdown false. So whenever I'm working with the Python files, GitHub Copilot will work automatically. Okay, it will provide in the code, etc., all those things. For markdown files, for example, the readme files which we use for the GitHub projects. So for markdown files, I don't want any suggestions from the GitHub Copilot, so I can provide a false. So it will not bug me in the in the GitHub readme files, basically. So this is how you can turn on and off this languages supporting GitHub Copilot. Now let's look at some recommendation, basically. So how we can use, how can get the most out of the GitHub Copilot. So it works best when you divide your code into smaller functions. So that's the first thing. If you're writing big functions, it might not work that well. And you have to provide meaningful names in the function parameters. So as I mentioned earlier, if you allow the GitHub Copilot to provide um, autocomplete, if you turn it on, it will provide better names. But before that, it should know the context of the functions. So you should be having some code, basically, with proper naming, so that it should understand what is the context and can provide you better suggestions. And there is also important thing, like when you're writing function, no, in Python or in Java, we have docstring concept. Docstring concept is basically like you're writing whatever the input and output parameters this function is taking, and also you're explaining the user that what this function does, basically. So that part you're writing in docstring. Mm, it can be a comment also that you have to provide in the function. So if you provide this, GitHub Copilot will get better context and can provide you better suggestions. Now let's look at the training set which was used by the GitHub Copilot. So as I mentioned earlier, it was mainly trained on the English language, and the source code was openly available in the GitHub Copilot, in the GitHub, basically, which was owned by the Microsoft. And why it was trained on the GitHub, on the data from publicly available sources? Because whenever we are working with the machine learning models, right, it is considered fair use if you use from the open source community. So that's why we are using this from the GitHub. And there are other communities like kaggle.com, which also provides you data sets if you want to work with machine learning. So it is also open source. So machine learning is mostly works on the open source models, and it provides you the insight and accuracy if you are working with the public collective intelligence. Now, the last question is, will GitHub Copilot help me to write code for a new platform? Let's say new API has come up. Okay, let's say AWS has released a new API, and it is not used by many developers. At that time, right, GitHub Copilot will struggle to give you better suggestions because it is not trained on that particular new API. Okay, so at that time, it might give you Stack Overflow suggestions, Stack Overflow links, basically, as a suggestion. You can go over that. You can provide you can select the code which you want, basically going from the Stack Overflow. But if something is used by many developers and it is there in the GitHub, then GitHub Copilot will surely provide you better code. Now let's look at uh, how it is providing the code, or how the training set it is providing the code from. So GitHub Copilot is not a search engine kind of. It is like a code synthesizer. So what it does, basically, whichever code it is used to train on, right? It um, it decouples the code basically into small formats, and that small format is called as token. Okay, so whenever you're writing a comment, basically, that I want to create a code for this particular function, it uses the tokens and it generates the code on the fly. Okay, that might not be seen anywhere, or that might not be used by anyone. Okay, that code will be unique because it is a code synthesizer. It generates code on the fly. Okay, and there might be cases wherein it might give you code from the data set which it was trained on, basically. That will be a very rare case, basically, as I mentioned earlier. If it didn't find the code in GitHub, or if it was not trained on, basically, it will might provide you some garbage code. But still, there is this way wherein GitHub is tracking all those cases basically, and they're trying to improve that GitHub Copilot behind the scenes. So those things are already in place. They are using some trackers to make the GitHub Copilot better. And now let's look at who owns the GitHub Copilot. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a tool basically, like a compiler or pen, and it provides you suggestions that it generates on the fly. Okay, and the code which you write using GitHub Copilot is yours. So you're solely responsible for the code which you are writing. If you are putting it on the production, you can't say afterwards that this code was provided to me by GitHub Copilot. GitHub Copilot is responsible for this. You can't say it because you are taking the responsibility and you are using the GitHub Copilot. So that's the main thing about that. Whatever code you are getting from the GitHub Copilot, you have to review the code and then only you have to push it on the production. Let's look at the privacy aspect of the GitHub Copilot. So there is always this case wherein the GitHub Copilot or any AI model like ChatGPT, they ever will be providing us the personal data of somebody. So they have already put up some safeguards wherein they are not providing you any personal data. Even if the GitHub code or anywhere it was found some email addresses or phone numbers, it will not provide you that. It might generate you dummy data and it will show you basically in the code, but it's not a valid data basically. So there are no cases at such that you are getting a personal data from the GitHub Copilot. Let's look at the responsible AI perspective of the GitHub Copilot. So how will advanced code generation tools like GitHub Copilot affect the developer jobs? So there is always this debate that making AI more smart will take a developer jobs or high performance jobs will be gone basically because AI will be much smarter than the humans. But that's not will be the case because there is a long way to go. These tools are actually helping you or assisting you to write better code. Okay, so that we should keep in mind. And at the end of the day, we need to do the work basically, even though if it is coming from the GitHub Copilot, we have to just verify and improve the code if we are able to improvise. So that's the thing about the GitHub Copilot and the responsible AI aspect of that. Yeah, thank you everyone.